Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a monthly webinar series co-hosted between the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council and the UT School of Natural Resources. We have Katie Donaldson from the UT School of Natural Resources here with us. She helps out a ton with this webinar series and running things in the background. So big shout out to her. And we're very excited today to have Dr. Yujuan Chen from Tennessee State University to speak about healthy soils for healthy trees. So I'm going to step away and hand it off to Dr. Chen.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for the introduction and also for the invitation. And thanks to Katie also for co-hosting this event. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. And now I think I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Looks great.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So today we are going to learn a little bit more about healthy soil for healthy trees. Now maybe we can start with to learn a little bit more about the audience we have today. So good morning, everybody, and all good afternoon or good evening, because I guess depending on where you are, I heard we have several international participants as well. So if you can type in chat, why don't you share your name and your affiliation, where you are calling from? So Katie and Kevin, can they use the chat function or not?
Yes, looks like we've got Mackenzie Wood from Utah, Jim Webster over Signal Mountain. Good to see you, Jim. John Snow, the Florida Urban Forestry Council. Good to see you, John. Neil in Murfreesboro, Eric Keeler with Nashville Metro, Garrett in Nashville. Yes, we've been having several participants from Canada joining us, all the way from Nigeria. Wow, Cottonwood, Tennessee. So I'll wow, now they're really pouring in. I'll hand it back over to you, Dr. Chen.
Excellent. And we also have someone from Nepal too. So I guess from Nepal, it must be like almost midnight or at least night there. So nice to meet you all and welcome to the webinar again. And I'm glad we have, a very good variety of audience and calling from like all over the world. So thank you for the tech to join this webinar. So today, I will give some background why we are talking about soil for an urban forestry webinar series here, and also give a little bit of background about the connection between soil and tree, and then we will dive into soil profile rebuilding, which is a technique to address compacted urban soil, and sharing the research, the long-term research finding, and also a recent exciting project we just established in Nashville here. So let's start with why. Globally, according to the United Nations, more than 50% of our world population lived in urban area. And this number is expected to increase to 68% by 2050. At the same time, we have a changing climate with extreme heat, drought, fire, sea level rise, and etc. So the question becomes, how can we provide a good environment, sufficient resources, and to the increasing population, especially in urban area. So the United Nations member had adopted a set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals back to 2015. Sustainable Development Goal, also called SDG, the SDG 11 is about cities and human settlement. And the goal is to make cities inclusive, safe, sustainable, and resilient. When we look at the cities, big or small, and like, all of you are coming from different region, different area, and different city or town from all over the world. But when we look at the cities, large or small, they have one thing in common. They're like a marriage between the built and the natural environment. And here, just some city I had opportunities either to work or to live. And the last one is the Nashville, which is the location where I'm sitting right now. And So within the city, we have green, blue, and brown infrastructure. So green infrastructure like our urban forest and other vegetation, and blue like water, and brown, that's the soil. So our urban forest as essential urban green infrastructure, they are just as important as a green infrastructure like pipes, buildings, and roads. For this first global guideline on urban and peri-urban forestry, I had the privilege to be a co-author during my work with FAO. It highlights the contribution of our trees and forests to sustainable urban development in terms of, for example, climate change mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, green economy, and also human health and well-being. And here's a local example. This is a one-pager we just developed, and my wonderful undergraduate Aria, who helped with this. And so it highlights the benefits of the urban forest we have in Tennessee. So the forest we have in Tennessee, it can provide lots of benefit. For example, it can sequester carbon and help with climate change mitigation. It can also mitigate heat and provide cooling and save energy and increase in property values. So now let's take a moment to imagine your favorite tree. So what is your favorite tree? Feel free to share in chat. And what kind of tree species are they? And what kind of memory you might have or story, and why it is your favorite tree. So let's take a moment and to see what is your favorite tree here. Feel free to type in chat. Yeah. So we got tulip tree, green tree, yeah. White oak, southern magnolia, black gum, red buckeye, Japanese maple. Oh yeah, ginkgo, that's my favorite tree, ginkgo tree. Ironwood, bur oak. Yes, the childhood memory with the big willow tree because they are beautiful. Yellow wood, white oak. Yeah, one more wood for ginkgo. Nice. Dogwood. Yeah, beautiful. Great. Thank you for sharing. And we got a really good variety here. And so you just shared your favorite tree. So what does your tree need? Does your tree need water, nutrient, air, and the support, or all above? Send your answer in chat. So what does your tree need? Yeah, we got lots of E. Excellent. Yeah, all above, including the space. That's true. Yes, you all got the correct answer. The answer is yes, all above and also beyond. So that's what soil provides. Soil provides water to our trees, nutrients and air, and the support that the tree need. That's why our trees love our soil. So that's why we are doing this healthy soil for healthy talk here today. And soil, it is the broad infrastructure. Thank you all for sharing your favorite tree, and also participant in the question. So soil is the broad infrastructure in the city, and it is the foundation for our tree establishment and growth in the city. And globally, here are some facts about our soil. Globally, about 95% of our food comes from soil. Soil stores more carbon than the atmosphere and terrestrial vegetation combined. Soil store and filter water, improving food security and our resilience to floods and drought. And soil hosts about 1/4 of our planet biodiversity. For example, 1 teaspoon of healthy soil can have up to 1 billion bacteria. So during urban land development, there are some typical urban land development practices like topsoil removal, vegetation removal, and contamination compaction and grading. So after that, usually we have very limited space. I think some of you already mentioned that in chat. Yeah, so trees also need enough space to grow. But in reality, we usually have limited space for our tree, and usually soil are very compacted and lack of organic matter. So here's one example for a Swiss tree. As you can see, the planting area is very small. Apparently, they did some enlargement, but by looking at how big this tree is, and the space is still very limited. And also when you look very closely, and the soil is very compacted too. And here's another example about tree planting space. And those two trees were planted at the same time at the same parking lot, but one with bigger tree planting area and the other one with smaller tree planting area. And after 14 years, here's the difference you see. And for the tree planted in the bigger area has much bigger tree canopy area than the tree planted in the smaller area. And here's another example for new construction site. And usually after construction activities, and you got very thin topsoil, and you got a very compacted subsoil. You might ask, how do you know the soil is compacted? Because when it rains, you got a little pond like this, because soil are so compacted and water cannot go in. So for the sites like this, for our tree, we will have a hard time to establish and to grow, and also provide the desired ecosystem services we need. So how the ideal soil look like? The ideal soil usually have 25% water, 25% air, 5% organic matter, and 45% mineral. But with compacted soil, you still have the same mineral and the same organic matter, but the same organic matter, but you might have more mineral and less space for air and water because you lost lots of pore space, especially for the macro pore space. So how do you usually measure soil compaction? Soil bulk density is one parameter you could use. It is the mass of the dry soil per unit of the bulk volume. So for the soil, the normal soil you have, maybe you have 1 gram of soil in the 1 centimeter cubic centimeter volume. But when you have the compacted soil, you still have 1 gram soil, but since you lost the pore space, the volume becomes smaller. That means when you calculate soil bulk density, the number will be higher. So the higher the soil bulk density is, and the compacted the soil is. And there are other means you could tell how compact soil is. For example, you can use cylinder rain sampler, and in the field, you can also use a penetrometer. So this is one easy tool you can use. It is not equal to the soil bulk density, but it tells you how compacted the soil is, because the harder you push, and the more compacted the soil is. So you might have a question, how can we prevent, or how can we remediate the compacted soil? First of all, prevention is very important, because you don't want to compact the soil and then you have to spend lots of time and effort to remediate the compacted soil. That's why being proactive is really critical. And planning and design that help. And for example, if we already know you are going to have the construction, you could be proactive. For example, this one you see in the picture, you could have the fencing to protect the site, especially around the tree root zone. And of course, you can also do mulching or do other ground cover, and to help reduce the compaction. And there are other ways you could do it. For example, the structured soil and the silver cell, especially if you are interested in stormwater management. However, if you are looking at the long-term rehabilitation, and not just the temporary and fixed And there's some other way, like the soil profile rebuilding. This is the technique we are going to share about today. So soil profile rebuilding, it is a technique developed at Virginia Tech for rehabilitating compacted urban soil in place. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Zunde at Virginia Tech during my PhD study, and now we also started a project in Nashville. So instead of replacing the soil, or you have to, this is one technique you could rehabilitate on site, which is the beauty about this technique. It was developed based on the request from landscaper and also practitioners who work with urban soil in urban setting. So it is a practical management technique for rehabilitating compacted urban soil for practitioners and also policymakers. So this technique includes subsoiling, compost amendment, topsoil replacement, and tree planting. Basically, there are 5 steps. If you have compacted soil with low permeability, low organic matter, you are looking for technique or practice to rehabilitate. There are 5 steps to follow. First of all, you add 4-inch compost, and then you mix it using backhoe up to 24 soil depths. And then you either add topsoil back or replace the topsoil, and then you do the rototilling of the topsoil. And most importantly, you plant tree. So those are the 5 steps to follow. And then over time, this will help you to rebuild the soil profile and to lower the compaction and to increase soil permeability, especially for stormwater runoff mitigation and increase organic matter. So now we are going to spend a little bit more time to look at the research findings, especially over time with the long-term research site we have. So initially, we set up this long-term urban soil rehabilitation site at the research farm at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And it is a long-term research project. Before my PhD, we had a master's student who worked on this project, and she mainly did the impact of the soil profile rebuilding on tree growth. And then for part of my PhD project, I also did for example, long-term ecosystem services, carbon, and stormwater runoff mitigation. So now we are going to take a little bit more time to look at the finding here. For this research, we planted 5 tree species, and with rehabilitated soil using soil profile rebuilding, we also had the control to compare. In addition to the soil profile rebuilding, we also have replicated urban soil, which is a degraded and compacted urban soil, and another soil rehabilitation technique, enhanced topsoil, because people usually say, okay, when you have the compacted soil, maybe you can just till it, and but is that enough? So those are the first soil treatment. We planted 5 tree species, including red maple, bur oak, swamp white oak, American elm, and also flowering cherry. So when we look at 5 tree species, all 4 tree species had a similar trend, except for the swamp white oak, because it grows much slower than other 4 tree species. So now we are going to zoom in to use the American elm as an example to look at what we found. The site was established in 2007, and we started tree measurements from 2008 until 2013. So that's 5 years data. When you look closely for the soil profile rebuilding, this is the tree canopy area. Soil profile rebuilding almost had double tree canopy area compared to the typical practice, which represents degraded, compacted urban soil. And it is even higher than the control. The control, which is, for this case, is the agricultural soil on the research farm. And especially for municipalities, for looking at either to sustain or increase tree canopy, the finding is very significant, because after 5 years, and basically the unrehabilitated soil had a double tree canopy area compared to the typical practice degraded urban soil. We also measure the soil carbon pool because especially in the context of climate change, and both soil and trees, they can play a role in carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation. So we divided soil carbon pool into 3 carbon pools based on their stability and available carbon, aggregate protected carbon, and mineral bound carbon. So basically from available carbon to mineral bound carbon, the stability decreased. That means the available carbon is the least stable carbon pool, and the mineral bound carbon is the most stable carbon pool. So after 4 years, and here are the results you see, in the topsoil 0 to 5 centimeter, the control had the biggest carbon pool. And when you look at other 3, due to all the soil manipulation, it had the carbon loss. The carbon loss not just in the available carbon pool, aggregate protected carbon pool. Surprisingly, we had a carbon loss in the most stable mineral bound carbon pool. So what does that tell us? That means with all the soil manipulation and the disturbance, and even with the most stable carbon, and it got lost. So that means the soil protection and the site protection and prevention is so critical. However, the good news is when you look at the deeper depths, 15 to 30 centimeter, with soil profile rebuilding, it increased not just in available carbon and also aggregate protected carbon only, in after 4 years. So that's really encouraging because that's something, could mitigate. The carbon, it increased in the subsoil, it can mitigate the carbon loss we had in the topsoil. We also measured hydraulic conductivity. It tells you how quickly the water can move from the topsoil to the subsoil. And we did surface 25 centimeter and also 40 centimeter. So after 5 years, and soil profile rebuilding had the highest soil permeability compared to other treatment. Even it has the equal or the greater soil permeability even compared to undisturbed soil. And that means with the compost, the addition, and also the tree planting, tree roots, and all the steps we did, it helped. So from the urban land use change, from the undisturbed soil to urban soil, that means we have because of compaction, we had a decreased saturated conductivity or decreased some permeability, but with soil profile rebuilding, it can mitigate and help. And that means, especially if you're interested in stormwater runoff mitigation, soil profile rebuilding, it is a promising technique that can help build soil capacity and increase tree growth, and also long-term ecosystem services, including carbon sequestration and also soil permeability. So the whole purpose of this controlled experiment is to replicate 3 types of urban land during and post-urban land development. One is pre-developed and disturbed soil, and typical developed degraded soil, and post-developed rehabilitated soil. Because from pre-developed and disturbed soil to the typical developed degraded soil, it has decreased tree growth, soil carbon loss, and also decreased soil permeability, which can lead stormwater runoff. But with best management practices like soil profile rebuilding, post-developed rehabilitated soil can help mitigate those impacts by increasing tree growth, soil organic matter sequestration, and also permeability increase. So the results have been published in several peer-reviewed journal articles. So if you are interested, they are available online. So this is the initial research project we did. And next question is, you might ask, okay, that's 5 years or 4 years after the experiment installation. Does this technique have long-lasting impact? We had the same question. we want to ask, what happened after 15 years or even longer? So we went back to this long-term urban soil rehabilitation site in Blacksburg, Virginia in 2022. That's 15 years after experiment installation. The picture on the left corner, this is how the plot looked like after 15 years. And as you can tell, trees were much bigger than before, and some of them, they even have closed canopy. So we went back, measured dBH, the diameter of the trunk cross-section area, and we also sampled soil for bulk density. We analyzed carbon and nitrogen because we wanted to see what happened after, so many years. For the soil bulk density, we did different soil depths, 2.5 to 7.6, 15.2 to 20.3, 30.5 to 35.6, and 50.8 to 55.9. As you can see, there was no statistic difference among soil treatment, which is not surprising because there has been 15 years. However, when we look at the trunk cross-sectional area, which is one parameter for tree growth, when we look at all 5 tree species, and we found, especially for American elm, and soil profile rebuilding rehabilitated soil had the greatest trunk cross-sectional area, and especially compared to the typical practice, which is represent degraded and compacted urban soil. So that means even after 15 years, the impact from the soil profile rebuilding still lasted, which is really, really encouraging. And when we look at the soil carbon, it has a similar trend. In the topsoil, the control or the undisturbed soil had the largest carbon, but the soil profile rebuilding started to catch up. But in the deeper depths, 15 to 30 centimeter, soil profile rebuilding had the largest carbon, and it has the equivalent soil carbon or higher carbon pool compared to the undisturbed the control site. So in conclusion, after 15 years, soil profile rebuilding, the impact or the effects from the soil profile rebuilding still are lasted. So it has both short-term and also long-term impact, which is really, really encouraging. And so that's the long-term urban soil rehabilitation we did with a controlled experiment at Virginia Tech Research Farm. And we also had opportunity with another graduate student we had in our team, David, who did a study in Arlington, Virginia, because we wanted to see, okay, in real case, what happened. And so he did his master in Arlington, Virginia with the street tree there. And the picture at the bottom, it shows how they apply compost and to implement the soil profile rebuilding with the tree planting area. So David found the similar results, and which is really encouraging. And then the city has decided to adopt it and also created this demonstration project. And you can see the picture on the left, that's the before, and the picture on the right, and that's after. And first of all, from the vegetation itself, and you can already see the results. And they also did the compaction measurement, for example, on the left. This is rehabilitated, on the right, that's unrehabilitated. Use a penetrometer, you can directly see the differences. So with rehabilitated soil, it has much lower compaction than the unrehabilitated on the right. Another thing they did with all the promising results they found with the street trees and also the demonstration project they did in the park, they have included soil profile rebuilding in their stormwater menu. So this is a policy change where we think about, transferring science into practice and inform policy using research. This is a very good example to show. So the urban forester Vincent was able to convince, his team and all the council members in the city to adopt soil profile rebuilding in this stormwater menu. And now it is required for soil decompaction and amendment, especially if you have disturbed new construction and you're required to use soil profile rebuilding to rehabilitate the site. So that's a case study, and the real, case study in Arlington. And now you might ask, okay, what can we do? What can we do maybe here in Nashville? So after I came here, I was connected with our urban forestry here. I believe who is online with us today, Eric Kuhler, and who has been a wonderful collaborator. And we were like, yeah, why don't we do it here? So with the great partnership with our Metro Water Services, especially Eric Chad and their team, and along with David Tree, we were able to establish this we call Nashville Long-Term Urban Soil Rehabilitation Site in southeast of the city. And what we are interested in with this project, and the purpose is to transform the weekend lot into urban green space. At the same time, we want to see how different soil management practices they could help our tree establishment and growth, and also long-term ecosystem services. So for this study, we have 4 soil treatment and soil profile rebuilding SPR. We also are interested in not just adding compost, what about biochar or combination of compost and biochar. So the innovation of this study is to not just using the SPR and also modified SPR with biochar and a combination of compost and biochar. So David was the one donated the biochar, so thank you. So we have 4 soil treatment, and each of them we have 3 replications. We have 12 plots, and each of them we planted 3 different tree species: American sweet gum, loblolly pine, and also tulip tree. We established this long-term research site last December, and here just some construction activity you see here. And also after the site preparation, we also planted those 3 species, those 3 tree species here. And from this picture, you see Eric and Chad and also my graduate student here, and they helped a lot and made it possible. So the picture here is to show you on the left, that's the before, and the picture on the right, that's during the construction. And thanks to my colleague, Dr. who did the drone flying. So now we have lots of photos to show how the site look like over time. And this is another closer picture using drone imagery, and you can see, so those are our plot, and also there are some unstudied trees, so we have more tree on the site. And this is the drone imagery, a recent drone imagery from May 31st this year. As you can see, first of all, it's much greener right now. And secondly, you can see trees are growing at the site, and with different treatment here. And this is a 3D image to show you how those trees look like on the site, thanks to the technology and my colleague Dr. for all those images. So right now, my master student who is on the right here, Diksha Taman, who is doing extensive field work and lab analysis. And actually, they were just on the site, and Chad was helping them with some soil sampling this morning. They were excited to do the soil sampling. So what's her research interest to look at the impact, the effect of different urban soil management practices here on soil property, tree growth, and also long-term ecosystem services like carbon, and also soil hydraulic conductivity. So mainly in 3 areas: soil characteristic, tree growth, and also long-term ecosystem services. Like this summer, she's doing very extensive field work and also lab work. Again, thanks to Eric Chad and their team, for helping with some of them. So that's just some, research finding highlights. And in summary, below ground matter. Soil is the broad structure in the city, and it is the foundation for our tree establishment and growth. However, in reality, and the urban soil we have are usually degraded, and the soil compaction is a big problem, and it is a limiting factor for our trees in the city, and it can also impair the desired ecosystem services. However, with the urban soil rehabilitation technique like soil profile rebuilding, it can help mitigate those impacts and help our tree to establish and to grow to the full tree canopy. And also it can enhance long-term ecosystem services, can sequester more carbon, and also mitigate stormwater runoff. Of course, there's still more work need to be done, and we are very excited about this Nashville long-term urban soil rehabilitation site, the project we are doing with Metro Water Services, and we will share more when the data and results are available. And thanks to all the funding agencies and all the collaborators and all the everyone who has helped with those projects and either in the field, in the lab, and a special thanks to Eric Chad and their team from Water Services for making it possible. And thank you all for your attention. Any question?
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your research. I know that this was a topic a lot of people have requested and were interested in, and this is the highest attendance we've had in quite some time. So I think that speaks a lot to you as a speaker in this topic, and I anticipate a lot of people will have a lot of takeaways and how they can apply this back in the communities they live in. So I'll hand this off to Katie to facilitate the Q&A. We have about 20 minutes left, so plenty of time for questions. Katie, take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to start out with the questions that we received from the registration first, and then I'll get to the ones in the chat. And if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. The first one, what are your recommendations for the best compaction prevention method for moving equipment or vehicles within the rooting area of a tree where avoidance is not possible? Are load spreading platforms sufficient?
Thank you, Katie. I have to say I'm very impressed by all the questions we have received, and thank you for all those good questions. So first of all, as I mentioned in the presentation, the prevention is really important, and if you can prevent, that's the best way. Or, if you can protect the site and the soil you have, and that's the best and the most efficient way. So if I guess the question said if it cannot be avoided, there are also some, approach could at least, reduce the impact. For example, you mentioned some kind of, a load spreading platform, that could be one way. And at the same time, you can also think about other way. For example, you don't want to do it, or you might want to try avoid to do it when the soil is very wet, because when the soil is very wet, that will even make the compaction severe, and also it can destroy the soil structure. So you might want to pick, when the soil are not that wet and dry. That's one way. And also you can use also, for example, mulching or the ground cover. That will help too. And even, if you have to do it, and you also want to, for example, stay away from the tree rooting area, or at least, the trunk area. And yeah, I guess, in reality, maybe, it's not the ideal, but at least, think about all the possible ways you could at least reduce the impact. I hope that addressed the question.
Yes. The next question, what are your recommendations for best trees along sidewalks in urban development with irrigation?
That's a really good question. I think, for the tree selection in general, it depends on, because you're asking about sidewalk. First of all, the sidewalk has lots of like infrastructure conflict, right? And first of all, you might have the limited space, right? And also you might have like maybe the overhead conflict and also the below ground like facility constraints. You might want to think about those factors, but it is very hard to give it like, okay, what are the tree species, because it depends on the site. Even with the sidewalk, it depends on where, right? And you might have different soil, right? But when it comes to tree selection in general, you want to look at the site, what kind of site and what kind of surrounding environment, and also what kind of soil do you have. And so this will help you to select your tree species. And also there are lots of resources and tools you could use. For example, there are lots of tree selection tools. I remember Virginia Tech has a tree selection tool you could use. And also back to California, they have the tree selector and you could use, and also Cornell, they have like tree selection menu. But essentially you need to choose, look at the site you have and also your preferences. For example, people have different preferences or the limitation, and some they might, prefer have like big tree canopy tree species. Some they might, want to avoid like trees that produce a lot of fruit or have potential for it like pollen allergy or other things. So I guess there's no, it's like one tree species for all. You have to really look at it like the site you have, the surrounding environment, the soil you have, and also your preferences, right? And also when it comes to the sidewalk, another very important factor is to think about roots. So like the tree species you choose, you don't want to have like too many shallow roots, because lots of cities they have they have lots of problem with like sidewalk and also root conflict. And basically after it's like you plant tree, after some years, the roots might come up and broke the sidewalk. And so it generate, a lot of problem and also liability issue too. I think, just think about all the factors, right? And then you can choose maybe some tree species that are suitable for a specific site and your needs.
Okay, next question. For urban areas, we hear rake your leaves versus don't rake your leaves. Which is best for the soils around trees?
That's a really good question. And so think about, those leaves are actually could be organic matter for your soil. And so if it's possible, from the healthy soil perspective, we definitely want to collect those, not to collect, I guess, to keep those leaves on site that will feed your soil. And over time, when they decompose and they're adding organic matter to your soil. But at the same time, especially in urban setting, you always want to be mindful with, all the policies and requirements, and also think about, liability and safety. And sometimes you also do think about, there's like different community, different municipalities that have different requirements. For example, does it create, safety or liability issue, or is it required? You have to rec them. So similarly, there's no, it's like, if it's possible, you want to use that as, your natural or organic matter to add nutrients, to organic matter to your soil. But at the same time, you want to be mindful, what is required, right? And for your neighborhood and for your municipality, and also are there any potential it's like risk or liability issue along with it. So I think, especially in urban setting, it is so complicated. And one is from the ecosystem, perspective, and at the same time, you want to be mindful with the urban setting itself.
Next question, can you speak to the effect of pouring concrete, such as driveways or sidewalks, on soil chemistry and how that may affect tree health?
That's a good question. I'm not familiar with the pouring concrete, so I'm not sure if I'm the best person to address that question. But when come to, the commercial product and you want to read, because for example, different brands that might have different content, right? So you want to read about, what's really inside of those, pouring concrete. I think that's the first thing. And also, yeah, for some chemical, you might to be mindful, right? And it might have some side effect to trees and vegetation around it. So, but as I, again, I'm not very familiar with the pouring concrete. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to address that question. That's a good question.
This person is interested in what soils are best for sweet gum in that poor or unamended soil is said to be best to keep them from growing too rapidly and splitting. They're interested in the needs of slender silhouette as it's growing in popularity.
Yeah, that's another good question. For sweet gum, we actually, as I mentioned, we actually planted them here in our research project in Nashville. And so for the soil requirements, and first of all, sweet gum, it's not that drought tolerant. So you don't want to have somewhere maybe it's like too drought. That's one consideration. And also because, it needs a space for roots. If you have very limited space, there may not be it's like a tree species you select for the site. Again, it depends on it's like the site you have, right? And also when you plant trees, think about not just the trees, the seedlings or the container growing tree we have now. Think about how big or how that will look like after 10 years, after 20 years or 30 years. And think about, do you have enough space for them? And are there any potential, conflict or concern? And yeah, I think those are some factors to consider.
How much organic material do you need to accumulate beneath the drip line of a mature tree?
That's a good question, but I'm not sure if we have a number for it. As I mentioned in the presentation, for the ideal soil, you want to have about 5% organic matter. So that's the ideal soil you have. And for the drip line, it's not just the drip line, and ideally you want to have good soil beyond the drip line. That's another thing. And also it's like how much you want to accumulate. For the mature tree, actually, because it has the leaves, drop every year. Actually, that could help with organic matter addition. But there's no, it's like a number there. To like, okay, how much you have to accumulate. It depends on the site and the soil you already have, right? And maybe the soil are already really good there, right? You don't need any additional. But in urban setting in general, I think the most pressing issue when it comes to the soil and also the quality of the soil is for newly planted trees. Because for newly planted tree, and as you all know, that if the site, especially the soil, is not good, that will have very hard time to establish. But once they, established and developed well, especially after their root system spreaded, well established. Actually, normally, if the site is not that, degraded, normally you don't need like too much like organic matter addition. But it all depends on, the site you have, the soil you have. I don't know if that addressed that question.
Is the incorporation of gypsum helpful in rehabilitating compacted clay soils?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Is the incorporation of gypsum helpful in rehabilitating compacted clay soils?
Uh, The gypsum, I'm not sure. We haven't done any research about it, so I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that.
Okay. Next question. Has a study been done regarding the application of artificial turf on soils and trees?
That's a good question. Maybe that could be, our future research, because for this long-term, study we did, because the main purpose is to help, urban tree, right? The purpose to address the compacted urban soil and to help tree establishment and also the growth and long-term ecosystem services. But in the future, maybe we could incorporate not just trees and look at the turf, and others like different landscape in urban setting. That's a really good suggestion.
Is there a technique that can be applied to existing trees?
That's a really good question. I think for this person who asked this question must have read the specification for soil profile rebuilding, because it is recommended for newly planted tree, because it needs lots of soil manipulation. And so if you already have tree, especially big trees, sometimes it's really hard, you don't want to damage your tree, especially your tree trunk. So for existing trees, there are, many ways. There are other, possibilities, and for example, people use adding to like organic matter or compost or put it like a mulch. And so I think, and also the ground cover too. So I think there are like different ways you can think about, and or you could apply, but it all depends on, the site, the species you have, and also, what's the need. And even like with existing tree, like the fencing we mentioned, right? And when you have the construction activities, you might want to put a fence around that existing tree. That's a very simple, practice you could do and to protect existing tree. And also you want to be mindful with the tree root zone when you have existing tree, or when you especially have big trees. Yeah, I think the key point is you want to protect, the site or the soil as much as you can. And also you want to avoid, the disturbance as much as you can, depending on, what's available and what kind of resources and tool you could have.
Next question. What did your study show on the SPR versus SPR with biochar?
That's a good question. Maybe that could be our next webinar after we have some data. As I said, we just established this experiment site last December, and right now we, started data collection, and we are doing extensive field work and lab work. But later on, yeah, we'll be able to share more results from this study. So stay tuned.
Can you address rehabilitating soil in areas which compost cannot be dug into 24 inches of depth?
Yeah, thanks to this question again. So this person must, either read the specification or at least, listen to what I said at the beginning. So yeah, 24-inch is really critical when it comes to soil profile rebuilding, because you want to add compost up to 24-inch or 60 centimeter, because for our trees, and depending on the tree species, and their roots are going to be very deep, right? So you don't want to just add organic matter to the surface soil or the top soil. So 24-inch is a really critical parameter. Even when we did our own installation, this is like one thing we were like, yeah, we really need to check the depths, right? So if you couldn't, I guess, you still want to add as deep as you can. That would be my recommendation. But ideally, yeah, you want to add up to 24-inch.
Are you familiar with, I think it's pronounced rhizophagy or right? I might be mispronouncing that.
Rhizophagy?
Yes.
No, I'm not very familiar. Are they like what kind, is it like a product for, I know there are lots of study have been done to like the rhizosphere and or the root inoculation and maybe related to that, but I'm not very familiar with it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Next question, how can this technique be adapted to sites such as the Nashville Basin's barrens, where bedrock lies less than 2 feet from the surface?
Yeah, this is a good question. Actually, I don't know if you saw one of the picture I showed for my student. Let me share my screen again. So if you look at the picture here, this is the this is one of the one of many rocks we dig out from this parking lot, because especially here, there are lots of rocks, and so that's it. Like the most challenging part actually when we did the experiment installation, thanks to our collaborator who were able to dig in all the rocks out, and but if it's less than 2 feet, I think this is similar to the question, the previous question asked, if you cannot go like 2 feet or 24 inch. So yeah, I guess, if you want to apply it and you want to, ideally you want to go, up to 20 feet, but, in reality, if you couldn't, you still want to go as deep as you can. So yeah, I guess that's the reality. But if there any way, you could go, there will be, or dig the rock out, that's one way you can try to do.
We have a few more questions, but I know we're getting close to 1 o'clock. Are you okay to answer a few more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Let's see. Is there a relationship between how certain tree species affect the SPR process? Do certain species either facilitate or hinder the timeline of soil profile rehabilitation?
So far, okay, for our so far we have done this, on certain tree species, right? There are still like some other tree species that we haven't. There are many, more tree species that we haven't. But the purpose, so if you have compacted soil, your trees, those might be hard to penetrate, and this is one technique to help. And we haven't done to like we don't have a database, to tell it's like, okay, maybe which tree species, do better. I mean, from the research finding, we can already see species perform differently, right? And for example, American elm, it responded, much, better than other because it grew very quickly. And for the swamp white oak, because it grew very slowly, and so after it's like 5 years, we didn't see the big difference. So there, in general, species will respond differently because they have different preferences, and they grow differently, and they have different structure. But the purpose for this technique, is to address the soil compaction and help those trees to establish and to grow. And one thing actually is very interesting. What we found, Eric and Chad, we were at our research site several days ago. We were looking at those trees. For example, the tulip tree actually, because they are very heat sensitive, and also because it has been dry and hot. So a couple of them, died. And that's one thing, we're like, oh yeah, this is definitely tell us, different tree species, that have different preferences. And also, for example, one thing we learned, they don't like very compacted soil when we have the control, which is unrehabilitated, because it's so compacted, you may not like it. So yeah, I guess the tree species in general, will have different responses to SPR or other soil treatment.
Is there a problem with adding organic compost or amendments 6 inches and deeper? Does this cause an aerobic decomposition and release of toxins?
That's a really good question. That's why if you go to the specification, soil profile rebuilding specification, which is free online. So if any of you are interested, feel free to download. It has a brief version. It also has a full version, so you can read and it tells, it specify steps. So one requirement for the compost, you don't just want to add any compost. And for the compost you're adding, and you should, at least it is a good compost, and it specifies the carbon nitrogen ratio, for example. And also you don't want to introduce, any other like toxic, contents to your soil. That's why when you apply the compost, and for this specification, it also has a compost quality requirement. And so that's one thing, because you don't want to introduce anything toxic to your soil and while you are doing this. And that's why when you apply the compost, you want to know what kind of compost it is, where does it come from, and what does it have. So that's really important. The quality of the compost is really important, and the depth of the soil addition is very important, and the tree planting, those are all critical components for this specification.
Okay. Just a couple more, because I don't want to get too far past the 1 o'clock mark, since I know people are going to have to start logging off. But one person asked, are there any studies or precedents on how we can apply this practically to actual urban conditions, as there are complex infrastructure situations that the trees compete with, such as storm and sewer pipes, roadways, light poles, heat island effects? Would love to see more precedents.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the case study that I should actually, so we started this study as a research farm, right? At Virginia Tech Research Farm as a controlled or replicated study. And then we also did the street tree study in Arlington, Virginia. So for the street tree planting area, that's the real case study in Arlington. And also the parking lot we are doing in Nashville, this is another real case study. So when you have weekend lands, and when you're trying to transform your vacant lands into green space. So those are the two, real case study. And either it's like with street trees or with like parking lot or weekend land in city. I think those are the two real case study you can learn from. But yeah, I understand there are lots of like conflict or concern. That's why you want to be mindful. For example, if you only have individual, tree planting pit, you may not, it depends on how large they are, you may not be able to apply it, right? But if you have like, a large area with several trees growing together, there might be, the area you want to apply. And the key is, as long as you can use the backhoe to operate, to apply compost up to 24 inch, that's the key. So think about how big your backhoe, how much operating space you might need to apply this technique. I think that could be like one limitation come to like different area. Otherwise, because it's very straightforward, and so it can be applied into different types of urban setting.
Okay, and I'm gonna make this the last question. Are earthworms good or bad on SPR?
Earthworms are definitely good, not just for SPR and for soil in general. And because earthworm, one of my colleague who has studied earthworm for many years, he called earthworm as superhero in the soil because it helps, loosen the soil and generate, the aeration and the pathway. And yeah, so yeah, we are like earthworm, that's for sure.
Kevin, I will turn it over to you now.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Chen and Katie, for running through all those questions, and to all of you for submitting so many wonderful questions, and for sticking around past the hour. I just realized I don't think we mentioned ISA CEUs. This is approved for ISA CEUs, we will be submitting the attendance sheet. If you haven't already, I know this is quite late, but if you could change your name in Zoom right now to your full name, if you haven't, which looks like almost everybody did, that does help us out a lot when we submit the attendee sheet. And then we have our next webinar scheduled for August. Katie, is there a slide for that?
Yes, just bear with me while I get there.
All right. Well, she's pulling that up. The next one is going to be on August 15th, same time. We have Gina Souders, the reforestation unit leader at the East Tennessee Nursery, giving a presentation on seed to tree. And the East Tennessee Nursery falls under the Tennessee Division of Forestry. That one has also been submitted for ISA CEUs. And we have a few other sessions scheduled for later in the year. So we will have one in September and October. And then in November, we have some in-person programming. So for those of you who are in Tennessee or in the region, November 13th, we are hosting a trees and law workshop. And then on the 14th and 15th, we have our annual conference. So more information on that and the registration link will be going out very soon. But until then, we hope to see you next month at our next webinar. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Kevin, Katie, and everyone. If I'm allowed to address another question, I think about the earthworm. Yeah, good point. For the earthworm, the native earthworm and invasive earthworm. So when you look at the earthworm, every earthworm is different. Like every tree is different. So yeah. So the native earthworm, are good, but at the same time, you want to be careful with the invasive one. So thank you all.